this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of Embodied Art by Science, and this is PhD Talk Episode 4. And today I'm going to be drawing a little bit on some of the content from another video series that I've been doing called Iron Age Textiles, where I explore some experiments that I did through video and putting things out there that are related to that particular series. So not just what I did for the experiment, but a little bit about what goes into planning experiments at this higher academic level. And so what I want to talk to you today is about a conference I went to. Now, if you know about Embodied history, you will know that I got my master's in museum studies back in 2010, and because of the economic slump from 2008, couldn't find a job that was going to pay me enough so that I wasn't living at poverty. So instead of staying in the States, I went to Korea, and I pretty much became like the YouTube personality I am now. And I went through a lot of trials to get there. But one thing I will note is because I had a degree in higher education, I knew a little bit more about how to go about experimenting and how to do the research and structure of everything that I wanted to learn more about, so I could not only learn something more for myself, but also put this into a format that would be easy to convey to other people. And so I would look for sources that were either easily available or something that you didn't need to read the book to get the gist of. So in that way I could be more accessible. But one of the things that I noticed was back in 2014, I had a video on warp-weighted loom technology. And when I was doing my experiments for the Iron Age Textile series, I actually looked back at that video, not because I intended to, but because I did a YouTube search to see if anyone else had come up with a video where they either set up an experiment, or they talked about it, or actually just watching somebody do it, because for me, I'm a visual learner, and being able to see that was super helpful. Turns out, I think my video was number 3 in the hits, and that could just be because I was looking with one of my personal account, which I use to help monitor from the user's perspective what my channel looks like. And so because I subscribe to myself, for obvious reasons, I need to see what it's like from a subscriber's point of view. I noticed that, you know, this video was there, and I watched it, and I was like, whoa. And this is where the meta stuff comes into play. So I had a very specific purpose when I set out to look for videos on how to do this stuff, and this was July of this year. And I noticed that actually, now that I've seen this video so many years later, it's really quite interesting what I knew back then that is still consistent today. And that, I would say, is craft knowledge. So the insights and the thoughts and the way that I transferred skills from one experience to the other is exactly the thing that we talk about in academia, which is innate or embodied experiences that are very useful in the way that we engage with the world, the way that we adapt it, the way that we kind of create social norms to restrict what is acceptable and what isn't. And of course, there's always stuff that changes. But I found that particularly interesting because what I represented back in 2014 was basically somebody who has a scholarly level of understanding of a craft. And because I had already been doing YouTube and I put this out on YouTube, I had basically a timestamp. I knew in parallel time what my education level was before that, what my specific experience with archaeology and textile studies was before that point. And it very much reflected what an average crafter might know about their material, whatever it is, that doesn't necessarily have to be academic or available only for university institutions. So that access was really quite limited, and I could tell from having watched that video how limited it was. But it didn't downplay all of the craft knowledge and all the experience and all the insights that I had just from having engaged with spinning and textile studies in general from a personal point of view. So I kind of use that version of me as a proxy for what I think a lot of other YouTubers actually, but I think this goes beyond what YouTube can hold, but a lot of people who experiment with their stuff, whether it's medieval, post-medieval, Viking, whatever time period, when they're studying a specific time period and they're looking at the more perishable materials like leather or linen or wool or you name it. There's a lot of intuition that they get from having worked with that material a lot. And so one of the things you don't want to do is denigrate anything that those crafters have learned, because it is imperative to have craft knowledge if you study craft in academia. And so that brings me to the next point, where I posted this experimental archaeology in Iron Age studies video, which I will link somewhere around here. And I got a message from a fellow PhD student who has now conferred her PhD status, so she's now a doctor. She messaged me and asked if I wouldn't mind submitting to the tag session, which I have here. And TAG is short for Theoretical Archaeological Group. And I went to one of these back in 2015 and unfortunately missed a couple of years because it's Christmas time and I'm usually very pressed to get other stuff done. So going to a conference at Christmas time is always very difficult for me. And usually I've already been to like 5 or 6 conferences before this, so I'm not usually inclined to go at Christmas time. But I went, and I'm really glad that I did, because one of the things that I think is really great about TAG is how it allows archaeologists to really explore certain ideas. So in this particular case, I wrote an abstract in less than a day. I think it was just a couple of hours one morning. And I sent it literally on the deadline date. But it's called Reconnecting Archaeological Textiles, Integrating Visual Media. And in this particular talk, I wanted to use that 2014 video and my 2019 video as a way to kind of compare and contrast through the YouTube platform, just like how you engage with the audience and who your audience is, and the kinds of and particular skill sets that are required to do that kind of engagement. It isn't easy and it's not straightforward, and it's something that as an archaeologist I'm not really prepared to deal with from that point of view. And so in this particular session I really enjoyed seeing all the variety out there where people were trying to use video, use filmography, use these techniques that are usually maybe we conceptually think of more for movies or TV and stuff like that, documentaries. But we don't think about it in usually the same way when it comes to archaeology. And I find that really fascinating because you'll have things like Time Team, which is huge. If you're an archaeologist, especially in Britain, you will probably have grown up watching Time Team episodes and you're very familiar with the sort of creative aspects of what Time Team was trying to convey, but also some of the criticisms and how that was sort of made clear in some cases, but not always. But I think with video, it really allows you the opportunity to kind of dig down into certain matters because of the way that you can capture with image that you can't necessarily capture with words. And for craft, that is particularly salient because what I do is very much a doing, a visual, but it isn't really a textual thing that I do. How can I describe how to set up a warp-weighted loom that would make sense at all? At the very least, I would have to use some visual indicators. Maybe I'd have like a whiteboard and I would draw. Maybe I would have like a sample or a scale size to show you how I did this. But in actuality, it would probably be best if I just showed you how I did it. And that's sort of this point where, yes, I can show you, but in academia, especially for archaeology, we're not familiar with this type of media being refable or being confirmed as useful rather than peripheral when it comes to real academic work. And that's sort of problematic and something that I think was really brought up during this tag session. And how we deal with it in academia is actually very important because as of now, it's not really standardized. There aren't ways of actually engaging with this in a critical way that gets at the points we're trying to make. So whereas you could say we're stabbing around in the dark trying to find something that works, what I think is more important at this point is to just start doing it. When I began this PhD talk series, it was kind of a way for me to kind of discuss textiles and higher education and what it's like to study this stuff at such an extreme level and some of the problems that either I have created personally, things that I perceive to be the case, which actually might not be, or otherwise just dealing with these particular issues. So if anyone is interested in pursuing higher education with textiles in any format, you know, these are some of the things to think about and to consider before you get into it, because there's not a lot of information currently out there that helps you understand a little bit more what you're getting into. It is not easy, as you've seen so far, but it's worth doing because I think there's a lot that we can learn from multiple experiences. So it's not just me being the only authority on this, it's about having a cohort of people who have similar authorities where we can come together and discuss. And that's kind of what this particular session was on. We're all people who did archaeology, maybe of different time periods, maybe they were more commercial, some of them were more academic, and some people were more familiar with using the camera and others weren't so much. So it's kind of like a baby step into this field where you've got basically just archaeology and filmography coming together and exploring what this format will allow us to do and how far we can take it before we need to start thinking about what is good and what isn't as good, because you might be sending mixed messages. And if you are sending mixed messages, what do we have in terms of templates or theory or protocols that we can sort of compare what we're doing against that constitutes good practice? And that's actually something we haven't really gotten to, and that was one of the things that was really explained because it was made very obvious in this particular session. But if you have any thoughts on this, I would be really interested to hear, because aside from this becoming a little bit meta, because I'm talking about myself as if I'm not myself, and you know, the different versions of me, even though it's all me. You know, the person from 2014 is clearly the person in 2019. You know, you have all this cultural and educational baggage that comes with it. All those experiences in the last 5 years have really changed me. So yeah, like, it's a bit weird to talk about this, but I think that one of the main things I'm trying to do is trying to elevate crafting and make it archaeologically viable, academically viable in video form, because you can't do much better than the moving image at this point, unless you're actually doing it yourself, which, you know, has its own problems. But I think this is the first step, but it needs a little bit more work, and just having talked through it, you sort of come to, like, you understand the gravity of what the potential is, but also some of the daunting tasks that you're going to have to get through to kind of overcome some of these hurdles in particular. Sorry if this video came off as a little bit rambling, but I really wanted to do it off the cuff. Here's why. In my video on experimenting versus experimental archaeology, I was a little bit meta because I was producing it for a YouTube audience, but I also wanted to make sure that I was conveying exactly what needed to be said at certain times. I actually had to study my analytics quite a lot and determine how I can fit all the relevant information in the first 5 minutes of the video, just in case people who just kind of wanted the gist, they could navigate away and still come away with my message. But if you wanted to see the full video, you would still at least get kind of an outline of where I was going with it, and the rest of the video would be sort of like the fuller explanation of it. But doing all these cuts increases my time in producing a video, and so if you look at me historically, I almost always do it all in one take, maybe two. So I don't want to have these moments where I'm sitting at the editor, clip, 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 because in my life I'm very easily distracted by the 80 things I have to do at any given time. So when I have to do all these clips, I end up producing a video and then I'm like, oh, I missed something, which is what I did with the very first video, and I had to go back and re-edit 40 minutes down to 30. So, yeah, that particular video, the one I'm talking about, Experimental Iron Age Episode 1, Experimental Iron Age, Experimental Archaeology Episode 1, I had to do a lot of cuts with that to make sure that it fit with YouTube, not necessarily with the way I like to do videos. And in a way, it's a little bit like self-censorship, because I can't just speak the way that I would and have to you guys. I had to alter it, and I kind of had to get over that issue. Like, if I wanted to produce what I wanted to produce, I couldn't just do it all in one take. Even with a script. I never, ever work with a script. This is my script, right? This is an outline that I was only using for the title because I couldn't remember the title off the top of my head. And I wanted to show you this because it seems more official than me just saying tag. But in the experimental archaeology video, episode 1, I didn't want to miss any points, and it was hard for me just to keep it on the forefront of my mind as I'm standing in front of the camera, firing it all off. And so a lot of things about that video I had to change in order to make sure that I said what I wanted to say, I had the right pacing, I got my message out quickly but also effectively over time. And yeah, I really don't like working with scripts. I hope that's not a bad thing, and that's part of why this video was a little bit rambly, because I think it really sets that contrast between what is much more heavily produced versus something which is much more organic. And it's not to say that either one is bad, it's just a matter of what works for the subject matter. And in this case, it worked for me to have lots of small, short, quick, successive cuts. And for this video, which is predominantly for me and for those who are interested in pursuing textile studies in higher education, and for anyone else who's just watching this, I'm going to consider you an interested party, and I'm glad to have you here. So, yeah, there's that. And how many times did I giggle in this video? You count? Anyway, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want content of other types like tutorials, if you want some daily vlogs where I kind of talk about some of the other products that I use and promote other handmade shops like from Etsy, just post that in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!